Jacob and Megan met in college. Their meeting could hardly be called fateful since they took the same classes and lived in the same city. Jacob played football and was the captain of the university team. The determined young man managed to combine both sports and studies, realizing that someday it would open many doors for him. Jacob lost his parents early on in life and was raised in an orphanage from the age of 5. Most likely, it was this fact that made him so strong-willed and helped him deal with all of the hardships life would later throw at him. Life in the orphanage was difficult because the young students grew up in the atmosphere of strictness and discipline. On the other hand, there was a positive side to it too. Jacob spent all of his free time reading books and self-educating. The strict upbringing clearly did some good for Jacob. After all, it was thanks to his perseverance and outstanding mental capabilities that he got accepted into college. Megan, on the contrary, grew up in a wealthy family and was an only child. So she was used to getting a lot of parental attention and love. The woman was exceptionally beautiful, so all the young men at her college were crazy about her. Unfortunately, despite her impressive looks, the young woman had a rather frivolous disposition. Thanks to her wealthy parents, Megan was accustomed to having expensive things, which ultimately influenced her character. Everyone who knew Megan knew perfectly well that she wasn't the least bit interested in studying, which she considered tedious and unpleasant. Instead of poring over books, she spent her time having fun at nightclubs and never missed an opportunity to party. It was at one of those parties that the wealthy young woman met Jacob, who invited her to dance. It was that evening that became the starting point in their rapidly developing relationship. "Mom, he's so handsome. Yes, he's poor and an orphan. But is that so bad?" Megan said to her parents. Rose and George Green exchanged meaningful looks in response and hurried to express their approval of Megan's choice. The fact was that they were already rather tired of the antics of their daughter, who spent her life in nightclubs and restaurants, and therefore they were incredibly happy that she was finally in a serious relationship. "Well, daughter, I guess we'll be dancing at your wedding soon. As for the fact that Jacob isn't rich, that's definitely not a problem. As long as he's a good person, everything else will sort itself out," George Green said. But despite her parents' approval, Megan was in no hurry to tie the knot. The fact was that she liked Jacob as a man, but she still wasn't ready to take the next step. After all, she was drawn to the man's incredible intellect, and not his appearance, since there wasn't anything exceptional about it. Be that as it may, the young people continued to date, growing more attached to each other by the minute. Time flew by. Megan and Jacob had long been a couple and were virtually inseparable. Meanwhile, the young woman's parents treated Jacob with special warmth and care. Frankly, they really liked the young man, who, unlike their daughter, didn't spend his time partying, but actually thought about his future. Jacob repeatedly told his girlfriend's parents that he intended to go into business after graduation. At some point, George Green started thinking of Jacob as his successor, who could one day take over the leadership of his company. Nevertheless, Jacob wanted to build a career on his own and didn't count on the help of his future father-in-law. The wedding was slowly getting closer, and Megan's parents couldn't be happier about its approach. But first, the couple needed to graduate from college and get their diploma. And if Jacob didn't have a problem with that, Megan, on the other hand, had to turn to her father for help. The fact was that her poor academic progress and systematic absenteeism, the woman was threatened with expulsion. Of course, George Green simply couldn't allow that to happen. Thus, to make sure his daughter did get her diploma, the businessman had to use all of his extensive connections. Only thanks to some unprecedented measures, George Green managed to avoid the shame of having his daughter get expelled shortly before graduation. Well, now you can think about the wedding. Although I know that Jacob wants to pay for everything himself and will probably reject my help, the businessman shared his thoughts. To the great surprise of Mr. Green, his daughter took the news rather coldly. Of course, Megan still liked Jacob a lot, but she wasn't sure she wanted to spend the rest of her life with him. Megan liked to flirt, and she enjoyed getting all the attention from Jacob, who was genuinely in love with her. But living under the same roof with him, cooking breakfast and spending family holidays together, Megan wasn't ready for that yet. At some point, she started treating Jacob more like a good friend than a boyfriend. Someone who wouldn't go anywhere and wouldn't put up with all her antics. The closer it got to the wedding, the weirder Megan was behaving. She started talking to someone on the phone a lot and would often disappear in the evenings, claiming that she was going out with a school friend. At first, Jacob believed that Megan was telling the truth. But when the man accidentally ran into Megan's best friend in the supermarket, he found out that they hadn't seen each other in over a year. What's going on? Is she deliberately lying to me? But why? Jacob thought anxiously. Deep down, the man didn't really want to fight with the person he loved more than life itself. Thus, Jacob convinced himself not to dwell on Megan's lie. But the wedding was getting closer and closer, and Megan's behavior was getting more and more suspicious. By that time, Megan and Jacob had already rented out a house in the city and were living together. To celebrate the occasion, they held a housewarming party and invited all their friends and acquaintances. One of the guests was Simon Davis, whom Jacob knew from his varsity football team. He was a known ladies' man who considered himself to be very handsome and was proud of the number of women's hearts he broke. In the midst of the celebration, Jacob noticed that Simon took Megan aside and started telling her something, gesticulating wildly. Of course, the man restrained himself as best he could and tried to treat the situation with due understanding. The rest of the evening was ruined, and Jacob caught himself thinking that he didn't trust Megan. The man's suspicions were further confirmed when he returned home from work the next day to find Simon in the kitchen, calmly drinking coffee. "Honey, Simon forgot his smartphone here yesterday, so he came back to get it," Megan blurted out quickly, catching the groom's gaze. But Jacob understood everything without words. A splinter of distrust had already settled in the man's heart, and Simon's unsuspected visit only aggravated the situation. Since the date of the wedding was set in advance and it was no longer possible to cancel it, Jacob decided to find out everything once and for all. The next day, Jacob went to an electronics store and purchased a miniature security camera. Then he secretly installed it in the bedroom in order to confirm or disprove his theory. But in order for the trap to close completely, Jacob had to do one more thing. "Honey, I have some bad news. I'm being sent on a week-long business trip. I understand your frustration, but there's nothing I can do about it," Jacob said, trying not to let his voice show his true emotions. "I get it, Jacob. Don't worry. You go on your business trip, and I'll be here waiting for you," Megan lied without batting an eye. Having picked up his suitcase, Jacob said goodbye to his wife and went to a hotel, where he got a room for a week. All this time, the hidden camera was connected to the internet, so it was sending the footage to Jacob's phone. What the man saw there changed his life forever. Nevertheless, he remembered that their wedding was just a few days away and that it couldn't be canceled at this point. Therefore, Jacob pulled himself together and decided to teach his fiance a lesson. To make sure their daughter had the wedding of her dreams, George and Rose Green rented out the most expensive restaurant in town. Many guests were invited to share this important day with the family. All the relatives and acquaintances, whom the Green family had a lot of, were invited to the wedding. The celebration was in full swing, and the caterers were nearly falling down from exhaustion, rushing around trying to serve all the guests. There was live music, which all the attendees enjoyed, and the overall atmosphere was fun and cheerful. Finally, it was time for the toasts and speeches. The first one to speak was the groom, who expressed his gratitude to the bride's parents for planning this incredible celebration. Then, Jacob held his breath for a moment and cut to the chase. "I'm glad that all of you are here today. I'm very grateful for your time and attention, and I could not repay you for it. So, I prepared a little surprise for you. Check out the bottoms of your chairs, and you will understand everything." After the groom's words, the guests started to murmur excitedly. Then, one of them followed Jacob's advice and found an envelope taped to his chair. Following his example, other guests started turning over their chairs to find identical envelopes. However, the most interesting part was when they began to tear open the envelopes. Inside, they found strange photographs, which depicted Megan and her lover, Simon. Since the pictures were taken in the bedroom, the young people were completely naked. A tense silence immediately filled the restaurant, as the guests were trying to shake off the initial shock. Then, they started looking at Megan with clear disapproval, while the bride would have gladly disappeared off the face of the earth right at that moment. Rose and George Green blushed to the roots of their hair and, trying to defend their daughter, suggested that the photos were photoshopped. Meanwhile, Jacob left the wedding ring on the table and left the restaurant to the loud applause of the guests. Out on the street, the fresh air helped calm his nerves a bit, and the man headed for the bus stop. Deep down, Jacob had already made up his mind a long time ago. Deciding to leave the city, where he experienced both love and betrayal, the man was sure that it was only the beginning for him. Jacob knew that from that moment on, there would be no more lies and deceit in his life, since it was impossible to build a strong relationship otherwise.